Can someone name for me the 4 presidents at Mount Rushmore? That's right. Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Roosevelt. Now, can you all tell me which one was not a surveyor? Roosevelt. He was an engineer, but he was never a surveyor. The other 3 worked for quite some time as surveyors as young men. So you have to ask yourself a question. Men that are destined to become president of the United States and end up on a monument like Mount Rushmore, why would they go into surveying at a young age? Anybody want to guess? What's that? Paid well, potentially, not always.
You get some land for surveying.
You get some land, yeah. If you're the one out there surveying and you've bought warrants to where you can purchase land for yourself, you could pick out the most choice and best lands for yourself while you're doing these surveys. The importance of the land in the 18th century was very critical if you're interested in social mobility and advancement. The land was a key to wealth at the time. And the other thing it could lead to is political appointments, and of course buying and selling land and building wealth, through that process. So that's a reason these men, when they were young, chose to pursue surveying as a career. The other interesting thing to point out about it is that it required a college degree to be a licensed surveyor. It didn't require any college education to be a physician at the time. So think of the difference there. So with that, let's talk a little bit about this 1773 survey that was done in Kentucky with Thomas Bullitt. This was the first official survey. Long hunters like Daniel Boone and others had been in here and were making tomahawk claims on land and trying to file it and so forth. But that was not an official survey, and none of those were ever accepted and patented. So how do we know about this? There's actually quite a bit of source material on the Bullitt survey of 1773. The Journal of Isaac Height, which is available in Dale Payne's Narratives of Pioneer Life and Border Warfare. Height was on the expedition, so he did maintain a journal that survived till today. There's 2 journals from both James and Robert McAfee, also available in Dale Payne's book. Thomas Walker Bullitt's manuscript, titled My Life at Oxmoor, Life on a Farm in Kentucky Before the War. Excerpts are available under Captain Thomas Bullitt, available online at bullittcountyhistory.org. And then there's a lot of references to this expedition in various letters and filings, such as Life and Times of Robert McAfee and his family, which was written by himself, April 23rd, 1845. So for such an early survey and expedition, we're lucky to have so much original source material for it. Another thing to understand about the process of settlement in Kentucky is the Virginia Charter. So a charter is not really a proclamation or order by the government. It's a business contract between entrepreneurs and the Crown of England. So if you had entrepreneurs, investors, and you wanted to open up a new colony, you just had to negotiate a charter with the king or with the Crown. And the original charter for Virginia was 1607, 2 years earlier than what I'm going to talk about here. And they only had narrow strips along the Virginia coast was the extent of that charter. 1609, Virginia came back and expanded that all the way to the Pacific Ocean and north to the Great Lakes. All the other colonies in the north had only claimed in their charters as far west as the Appalachian Mountains. So they left all that land unclaimed, and Virginia got very ambitious about it. As you know, that didn't end up being all of Virginia today. There's some important treaties to understand as well that really impacted the settlement in Kentucky and how it unfolded. The French and Indian War ended with the proclamation of 1763, which basically established British rights to the Appalachian Ridge line from Massachusetts to Spanish Florida. An important aspect of that proclamation from the king is that it recognized native rights. So he said no individual or private land company can any longer purchase land from the Indians. Only the Crown could, and it would never be taken militarily, only through negotiation and purchase. So the king was he was basically establishing sovereignty over the native tribes of the eastern United States, and then paving a peaceful way for continued westward expansion, but it was going to be at a very slow pace under that. The Treaty of Hard Labor in 1768 involved the Cherokee relinquishing territory in what is current-day West Virginia. Then the Treaty of Fort Stanwix, 1768, later that year, basically relinquished land from the Ohio River to the Tennessee River. Now, who relinquished that land? The Ohio Valley tribes like the Shawnee and Delaware and all living in the Ohio Valley? No, it was the Iroquois Federation, or Six Nations, which negotiated that treaty. Then the Treaty of Lochaber in 1770 redraws the Treaty of Hard Labor with the Cherokee. That's also known as the Donaldson Line because they surveyed it in 1771, and notable Indian chiefs from the Cherokee went with the surveyors to agree on where the lines were. The problem they had is that some of the people of the original survey line, you had Indians living on the wrong side and whites living on the wrong side. So they were trying to correct that and doing that peacefully. Then the Treaty of Camp Charlotte, 1774, was conducted in Ohio, and that followed the end of Lord Dunmore's war with the Shawnee in that year of 1774. Then the Treaty of Sycamore Shoal, 1775, Richard Henderson, a prominent Virginian, negotiated with the Cherokee to purchase all of what is today is Kentucky. So they were all too glad to sell it again after it had already been released once by the Iroquois Federation for settlement, and the Ohio Valley tribes didn't accept or agree with any of those treaties. So are you confused at this point as to what treaty you can follow or not? That's good, because you should be confused, because it was very confusing. Who really had the right to sell the Kentucky lands is very debatable. And then the way it was all unfolded and conducted, it created a lot of conflict that came afterwards. So just some visuals on that. The red line down pretty much follows the Appalachian Trail of today. Goes down the center of the Appalachians all the way to Florida. That's what the Proclamation of 1763 established. So everything on the left of that line would be Indian country. This shows you the boundary defined in the 1768 Treaty of Hard Labor in the red. Then in the yellow is the Treaty of Lochaber, which revises that line. And then the green line was a unofficial negotiation that happened after the Treaty of Lochaber, where for undisclosed amounts of money or goods and unclear lines of demarcation, what is basically about a third of Kentucky was sold at that time. So to Lord Dunmore, the colonial governor, depending on how he looked at the laws and who negotiated what, Kentucky was open for settlement. So that's why he solicited Thomas Bullitt to carry out this first expedition to start surveying land. Just another map. This map was actually drawn by the Sir William Johnson, who was the chief Indian agent at the time for the British government. So he negotiated the Treaty of Fort Stanwix. So that was someone with the power and official capacity to negotiate that relinquishment of that land. And just another map that just shows some of these demarcation lines. This is the Lochaber Treaty line. And then I think this is our last map to look at, again showing the 1763 proclamation, Fort Stanwix line, which is the red line. So everything south of the red line, according to Sir William Johnson, the chief Indian agent, that had been sold. And that would be all of what today is Kentucky. And part of West Virginia, probably part of Tennessee as well. So how did you acquire land in the 18th century if you were trying to leave Virginia and settle further west? There's four ways really. You could be awarded military warrants, which basically for service in the French and Indian War. The Crown incurred enormous debt with that conflict, as all wars are very costly. And to pay the soldiers and officers, they gave them these warrants for X number of acres. So an officer like a colonel may receive as many as 2,000 acres in warrants. A private 50 acres and probably had rights to buy additional. But these warrants were fully transferable, so a surveyor could buy them. Or somebody that wants to move westward could buy these warrants because not everybody wanted to move and go into the frontier. So that created some flexibility as far as getting rights. But the warrants don't tell you when you're going to get the land or where it's going to be. It's just a government promise to provide acreage to you some point in the future when there's land available. Next is a treasury warrant, and that's just where the government has opened up land for settlement and they're selling land to the public. And you'd be issued a warrant with that purchase. It has the same problem of knowing when you're going to get the land and where it's going to be. But if you develop a relationship with a good surveyor and you're kind to them and pay them, they're probably going to help make sure you get, and the more prominent you are as an individual, probably the better quality land they're going to survey for you. What's interesting about this particular survey, you can go to the next slide, is I found on the internet a newspaper ad for it. So in the Virginia Gazette, December 3rd, 1772, Thomas Bullitt posted this: "I hereby give notice that I shall attend with Mr. Douglas and such other assistant surveyors as it may be thought necessary to appoint by the 15th of April on the Ohio, opposite to the mouth of the Scioto River, in order to survey the lands claimed under His Majesty's proclamation, also any other claims that I may be directed to survey. Therefore recommend it to the officers and soldiers that do not personally attend their surveys to appoint agents to see it done and receive their lands, Thomas Bullitt, surveyor." So ran an ad for this expedition, and he's recruiting men, and he's looking to pick up as many warrants as he can, because the more surveying he does, the more he'll earn from the expedition. Well, hold on here. I've got sticky paper. All right, participants. We know there's about 40 men on this expedition, but we don't have all their names. There's some prominent individuals here. Obviously, Thomas Bullitt. James Douglas was a deputy surveyor. James Harrod, found at Harrodsburg here in Kentucky. I actually have Harrod's Creek wrapping around the subdivision I live in Prospect, and he would have named that creek after himself on that expedition that we're covering tonight. Hancock Taylor was a very prominent man on the frontier, another deputy surveyor. Matthew Bracken, Bracken County, he named after. The McGaffeys, James, Robert, and George. That Samuel Adams is not the Samuel Adams you'll think of. It's another one. So total about 40 individuals. Now, who would lead such an expedition? You got to think they're going 500-600 miles from the nearest settlement into the frontier and into Indian country under very difficult, challenging circumstances, exposure to weather, and with no real information or maps about the area they're going into. So Bullitt was born in Prince William County, Virginia, 1730. 1754, he was made captain of county militia. He served with George Washington in Battle of Great Meadows and Braddock's expedition. Battle of Monongahela, 1755, he was the hero of Grant's defeat. Battle of Fort Duquesne, 1758. 1763, he became adjutant general of state militia. 1766, he built an inn at Hot Springs in Bath County, Virginia, on his 300-acre tract of land grant. And that is still to this day the Omni Homestead result with the springs there. He contributed to victory at the Battle of Great Bridge, which drove the British from Virginia during the American Revolution. For that action, he was promoted to colonel. He was elected several times to the House of Delegates of the newly formed Virginia government during the war. He died in his home in Fauquier County, Virginia, February 1778, at age 48, leaving his estate to his brother, Cuthbert Bullitt, and his nephew, Alexander Scott Bullitt, settled in Kentucky in 1783. Bullitt County in Kentucky is actually named after Alexander Scott Bullitt, not Thomas Bullitt. So let's jump into this expedition now. So after he ran that ad in December, at May 11th at Fort Pitt, George Cron, and he's the uncle to William Cron that built Locust Grove in Louisville, if you've ever been there, historic home. He wrote a letter to Thomas Wharton. Captain Bullitt is now here with instructions to secure lands on the Ohio and to make returns to Virginia. So that's just another independent source that gives the date when the expedition actually launched. Sometime in late May, Bullitt and the main contingent of men departed from Fort Pitt with a boat, which was later identified by McGaffey as a bateau, and 2 canoes heading to the mouth of the Kanawha River. A bateau is basically like a wooden rowboat. It can range from 20 to 40 feet in length, and that's probably what they carry most of their supplies in, because most of the canoes they had up to this point were probably dugout canoes. They'd been very narrow and very heavy, very awkward to deal with, and would not have provided much room for supplies. And keep in mind, this expedition is going to be about 5 months in length. So next picture kind of gives you a visual. I have 4 birch bark canoes, and I do expeditions in Kentucky with reenactors. And this is some of the same waterways they would have been on. With the same mode of travel, we wear all the same clothing, eat the same foods. We basically go off for 3 or 4 days and try to experience it for ourselves, what it was like traveling on the frontier at that time. So, negotiations in progress. On June 1st, the group left Bullitt while he traveled overland to Chillicothe to meet with the Shawnee, where he arrived June 5th. They were very startled because he and his Delaware guides walked into the Shawnee village unaccosted, undetected, and they said, "How did this white man just walk in here like this?" They threw him in wigwams for 3 days, finally gave them counsel, and he did a very elaborate speech on behalf of Lord Dunmore, and he did document that speech, but it's a little lengthy to share with you here tonight. So he made an impression enough on them that they said, "Okay, you can go on and do your surveying." But in their mind, they didn't say you could settle there. They just said you can survey. So he arrived at the village on June 5th. He traveled with 3 of his men and 3 Delaware Indians who were probably serving as guides. He wouldn't have known how to get to the Shawnee village. The group, okay, we talked about them walking into it. The rest of the company traveled downriver for 20 miles, camped and killed meat, and scouted the land. After the negotiations were successful, he acquired another 2 canoes from the Shawnee and descended the Scioto River to catch up with the rest of the party. June 7th, the party came to Large Creek, 112 miles. And by the way, the entries I'm sharing here with you are composites of the 3 journals. So they're all too lengthy to share them in their entirety, so I picked out some of the more interesting stuff to try to give you a picture of what this expedition looked like through their eyes. So on June 7th, they came to Large Creek, hunted, noting the fine lands on either side. June 11th, the party arrived at the mouth of Scioto to await Bullitt, noted 2 old Indian towns on both sides of the river. And this group was accompanied by 9 canoes of Delaware Indians. These bark canoes the Indians had were probably 20, 30 feet in length, and this would have been a very large Indian party. So that probably left them quite nervous. June 13th, Bullitt arrives at the mouth of Scioto with good news and is accompanied by Richard Butler, who was a trader, a goods trader, not an honorary trader, with the Indians from Fort Pitt, and there were more Delaware Indians with them. Butler served as interpreter for Bullitt at Chillicothe, without which events could have been disastrous. So this picture gives you a little visual of them on the trail from the Ohio up to Chillicothe, to the main Shawnee village. Bullitt and his men with one of the Delaware guides. So there was a second ill-fated expedition that same year. Another party under William Thompson of Pennsylvania landed at the Scioto to meet with Bullitt. Thompson was also on an expedition to survey land warrants for military service, but for Pennsylvania veterans, not for Virginians. And remember the original charter, Pennsylvania didn't have any claim to Kentucky lands. Only Virginia did. So Thompson was not licensed to survey in Virginia, and he hoped to convince Bullitt to enter his surveys for him. So he was relying on a partnership to make this work. He had a contingent of more than 60 men that left Fort Pitt on flatboats, and he sent with other men horses with supplies overland. Some of Thompson's men did encounter some of Bullitt's party during some of the surveying that summer, but the 2 lead men never did connect. So Thompson's horse contingent was attacked by Indians, never delivered the horses and accompanying supplies. So the other expedition attempted that year was running into all types of disaster, basically. Thompson's company split up and surveyed many of the streams and rivers on the Ohio, particularly up the Licking River. He later submitted his surveys to William Preston, that's Colonel William Preston in Virginia, who was the head surveyor that would have been in charge of approval of surveys for any western lands. and they were all denied on the grounds that they were made illegally. Pennsylvanians made another attempt to have them recognized in 1783, but no land titles were ever issued as a result of the Thompson surveys. So that must have been very disheartening to launch such a difficult expedition into the frontier and come up short-handed with nothing out of it. And these expeditions would have been very costly as well, assuming the men got paid. This just gives you another visual of a birch bark canoe and one of the main means of travel. Typically, birch bark canoes were built by the natives. It takes a lot of skill to build one properly. There are artisans that do it still to this day. Most of them are Native Americans up in Canada. It's very hard to get bark in large enough sizes now. Most of it comes from Siberia to be able to build a good one or a good sized canoe. Back then, though, they would have had plenty of good quality bark. And it's not just birch bark. You can build bark canoes out of about a dozen different types of trees. So back to the surveying underway, June 17th. Went down 10 miles, and again, I'm just giving you excerpts of their journals, and the spelling, I usually just show you how they spelled it so you can see how their English was. I went down the river 10 miles, found a creek with a salt pond, noting good deal of fine land and limestone water. After several days, camp moved 16 miles down river and encamped. Very fine land along good river for corn, hemp, tobacco, anything that a man can put in the ground, they said. June 21st, Abram Hamptonstall and James McMahon laid off officer rights of 2,000 acres on Salt Palm and up the creek. McGaffey recorded they walked 30 miles up and down that creek, observing land, waters, and timber. So the surveyors weren't just laying out and drawing the location of the land in the survey. They were making a lot of observation and notes about the quality of the wood, the water particularly, the soil. They said that in Kentucky, a man could grow 4 times the crops on an acre of land of what they could in Virginia. The soil was that good. Captain Bullitt left his bateau there. Mr. Kennedy, surveyor, and 12 men laid off a town of 100 acres on the river. Not sure what that town was or if that's still in existence to this day. June 24th, McGaffey left the river, followed the creek 10 miles, came to another river, followed about 25 miles, went over a ridge, found a good deal of wheat land. Again, they're making note of what they think the land would be good for. Came back to Ohio to look for his canoe, which was gone. So either stolen or borrowed. Had to make a bark canoe and went down river and found the company on the 27th at the mouth of the Licking River. So it's interesting, white men typically built dugout canoes, which is just dropping a large tree down, and then with fire and axes hollowing it out into the shape of a canoe. But they're very unwieldy and would be very heavy. You couldn't carry them over land very well. But they did know, obviously, how to make a bark canoe, so he probably just did something very rudimentary to get downriver and catch up with the rest of the party. June 25th, the main party sailed 30 miles to Little Miami in the Licking River, which is currently Cincinnati and Covington. The 26th, McGaffey left Mr. Douglas, the surveyor, and part of the company's survey, 7,000 acres up the Licking River. So now they split up. Bullitt and part of the contingent is going downriver toward the Falls of Ohio, and the others are going up the Licking River to survey and scout land. On the 30th, they went to the Big Miami River, lots of lowlands where the Peaks live, an Indian nation. I can't find any reference to the Peaks of the Ohio Valley, so I have no idea if they were documented it correctly or misunderstood them, who they were. They could have been some subset of the Shawnee, but there's as far as I can find, there's no reference to such an Indian tribe. But that's how they spelled it in the journal, was P-E-K-S. Next picture, just show a surveying compass in use with a tripod. For the frontier, and this is an original, the one on the tripod here is an original surveying compass which dates about 1750, so it's a very early one. The other one is a wood compass on the table there that's in the storage box, and that's original as well. A lot of the items there are. And for the frontier, they would have had a Jacob staff, which is a single pole. You'd just stick in the ground with the compass on top of it, because working through the woods with a tripod is not that easy. I think it's at the Ohio, the mouth of it is Kenton County. And then it would travel through a lot of counties of Kentucky, and you have several branches of the Licking River. Cave Run Lake is actually a part of the Licking River that has been dammed up. July 2nd, went downriver 25 miles, lands on both sides, more flat and rich, but not much water. On the 4th, came to Big Bone, where Captain Bullitt intended to make station and survey land. So that's Big Bone Lake State Park today. Anybody been there? Okay, so you're familiar with it. They stated it was a wonder to see the large bones that lie there, which had been of several large creatures. They thought they were elephant bones, but the mammoths that those skeletons were from were probably twice the size of an African elephant today. And that was a bog that they must have got caught in a lot because there was a huge deposit of bones there when the first frontiersmen came in and these surveyors were there. A lot of them were taken off and shipped elsewhere. Some of them went to England. Thomas Jefferson had a massive amount of them loaded up on some flatboats to bring back east, and the boats sunk and we lost all of them. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any, the park doesn't have any on display. The springs that would have created the bog and made that a wetlands and a trap for the animals must have dried up due to diversion of use of water, because I don't know of any marsh there at this time. They said the waters are mud or of a sulfur smell at that time. July 7th, there came a trading canoe which told them about above the Kanawha that they came upon a man lying in the edge of the water that appeared to be killed by Indians. So that would have gone through them like a lightning bolt because they're very exposed out there. These surveying parties would have been heavily well armed, but they weren't prepared really or planning to take on Indian parties. So they went 25 miles downriver until 8 o'clock at night and put ashore and laid in the canoes, all that. They just obviously slept in their canoes because they wanted to be ready to move out if they had to. July 8th, left an hour before day with Mr. Taylor. 8 men got to the mouth of Kentucky or Lavisa and went about 18 miles upriver to the mouth of the creek and came towards Big Bone. July 9th, went upriver 5 miles to the mouth of the creek and Sandbar, up the creek 1 mile to Salt Lick, which is a wonder to see. I don't know where that is. I haven't been able to find it. I think they're on Eagle Creek off the Kentucky River, which is shortly after you leave the Ohio and go up the Kentucky. And the Eagle Creek runs north-south. So I believe that's what they're referring to. But they're saying this Salt Lick was a mile in length and 100 yards wide. Mr. Brecken, who went to the Shawnee Nation with Captain Bullitt, got notice of that lick from some Indians, promised one of them a rifle to tell where it lay. So he knew about this location somehow in advance, and he got the Indians to give him directions to it. Next picture, just another pictures from some of our expeditions to kind of give you a feel of how this would have looked. Next photo. All right, let's see. I've got sticky fingers here again. Sorry. July 10th, 14th, they lay there until there was some land surveyed. Around this time, Bullitt arrives with a large party of Delaware Indians who were returning from a long hunt. Bullitt placated them as he did with the Shawnee, with their promise not to molest him. Bullitt then left for the falls. The McGaffeys continued along the Kentucky River and its tributaries looking for choice lands to survey. I don't know that they surveyed anything this far into Scott County. It's possible, but I don't think that's where they gave up before they got that far to where Lexington is today. On the 15th, McGaffey took a small buffalo path, which is about 50 and 100 yards wide, so a 150-yard wide path. And they followed it for 30 miles across low, flat ridges, middling good timber and land, but no water. So these buffalo traces or paths where the buffalo come through. Some frontiersmen said when they come to a trail and the buffalo were coming through, it could take an hour to wait for them all to pass. They were so great in number. And this obviously, these traces weren't narrow trails. They were very wide areas that the animals had beat down, probably from thousands of years of animal migration. July 16th, came to the same river, the Kentucky, crossed it. 17th, set off for Lavisa, left an axe, tomahawk, and fishing gig in the spring in McGaffey Springs. I actually know where that spring is. It's on private property. It's about 15 miles just north of Harrodsburg. And I hope to purchase an actual survey for McGaffey that was in that area as well, that a friend of mine owns. July 23rd, made 3 surveys in Crooked Creek, which is today Salt River. Salt River makes a lot of turns in it, so that's why they named it Crooked Creek. Not sure when the name changed. 3 more surveys for George McGaffey, 3 more for James McCoon Sr., and made 2 surveys for myself of 400 acres each. So as we talked about earlier, they were definitely probably more interested in acquiring land as opposed to the pay they're going to earn on such a difficult expedition. On the 24th, McGaffey made 6 more surveys, moved camp on the 30th, made the last of the surveys, parted with the surveyor, Mr. Taylor, which was Hancock Taylor, Isaac Height, and 2 more men that intended to go back to Captain Bullitt at the falls. And this is assuming the Taylor probably took all the surveys they've been doing to Bullitt. And how they kept all this paperwork dry, because they would have had done a great deal of note-taking on every survey, and this would all be used to write it up later when they get back to the settlements and take it to the courts or to William Preston to get the surveys approved. Then they'd have to go to the court if they went to the county surveyor and get patented, and then a title issued after that. So there'd be a lot of information needed. So how they kept everything intact and dry is a challenge for me, especially going out and living weekends and days like we do in the field like this. It's keeping everything intact, trying to keep journals together and dry would be a total challenge. 25th, Isaac Height and Company floated all night, arrived at Harrods Creek, which again wraps around my subdivision where I live. 29th, made 4 surveys of 400 acres each. 30th, made 2 400-acre surveys. So you can see in their journals, they're talking a lot about the hunting they do a lot, because that's one of their main food sources, is the fresh game that they're bagging on a regular basis. They notated the amount of acreage they were surveying. It ranged from hundreds of acres a day to thousands of acres. On the 31st, per Height, went to camp. Hard rain, again, that's their spelling, R-A-N-E. First laid at camp, second went to the falls and camped, third went out to kill meat, fourth made 2 400-acre surveys. Now, one of the challenges of traveling these river systems in Kentucky is you may not always have a good place to camp. You notice they make note of their camp, but they don't go into a lot of details on what they used. I'll talk about some of that in a minute, but this was an expedition I did from Jackson, Kentucky down to Beattyville. We traveled 35 miles a day. And we couldn't find any good place to camp late in the day, so we had to form a human chain to pass everything up the muddy banks to a flat area where we could sleep for the night. And this is another picture of our human chain doing that. We also passed the canoes up, next picture. And this is what you can do with them. They turned them over and used them for shelter. And on this expedition, it rained hard every day. So it was nice to have a dry camp at night. So the McGaffey party, which is following the Kentucky River and crossing it frequently, is trying to head back to Virginia over land. The trip was done on foot, and they would cover about 20 to 30 miles a day, which bushwhacking without a trail in Kentucky at that time, covering that kind of mileage, crossing rivers and streams and so forth, very impressive pace. I do a lot of outdoor hiking and so forth, and I can do 14, 15 miles in a day in rugged terrain in Kentucky, but that's about my limit. August 6th, rained some all day, came up river 20 miles through some very bad ground, had hard time getting along, and they had the river to raft across multiple times. On the 7th, they came 25 miles. So they're keeping a good estimate. And again, since they're surveyors and they work the land, they have a good feel for the distances they're covering. On the 8th, they came about 25 miles. River was very crooked. They had to cross 20 times. Now, that'd be a challenge. Killed a buck elk, and they laid there all night. August 12th, McGaffey party, still traveling on foot, reaches the Cumberland Mountain and they crossed, I think, at Big Stone Gap. They didn't make it as far south to the Cumberland Gap. So north of it, about, I think, 20 miles maybe, is where Big Stone Gap. The road cuts through there today. You can drive this route they took. Getting through the mountains was difficult. Provisions almost gone, nothing to kill. On the 13th, they traveled 8 miles across the head of Powell's Valley to Hunter's Path. Had 2 mountains to cross on a small path. 16th, Monday, they came 5 miles to Captain Russell's. Our feet very much scalded, so I mean blistered, and so lame that we could not travel. This gives you a good idea how the Shawnee hunting parties may have looked at the time. And if you recall, while they were traveling on the river, they were escorted or surrounded by natives all the time. So the Ohio River, particularly in the summer and back in 1773, would have been a very busy highway. These are reenactors that do a very excellent impression as woodland Indians. So back to August, surveying at the falls. So, you know, that was the McGaffey party that split up and went back overland. So Bullitt is still in the Falls, Ohio, or the Louisville area doing surveying. 5th through 9th, Height and Douglas went to survey for Bullitt from the falls downriver. So now they're going below the falls where the locks are now and following the river downstream. Bullitt and his crew continued to survey at the falls. On the 13th, Height rendered at camp, plotted, rode all day. Hard rain, gale all night, wet in canoe, lost most part of our powder. 15th, dried our things, followed meanders of the river, surveying 3 2,000-acre tracts. 17th, went up Salt River, about 20 miles, and unloaded the canoes and killed 3 elks. 18th, went to Salt Lick and stayed the 19th and 20th. That today is called Bullitt's Lick, and that's currently at Shepherdsville, Kentucky. And the town has capped that lick off and uses that water supply to this day. I said the lick. The lick really refers to the ground around the spring because the animals like to lick it for the mineral content. But it's actually a fresh spring is what we're referring to. 23rd, went out with Mr. Douglas, a survey to look for some land for him. Again, a reference that they're looking to capitalize on this expedition and gain a lot of land ownership. Killed a deer and buffalo, went down to the mouth of the Salt River. On the 26th, overtook the canoes so 3 days later, he's back to the Louisville area, overtook the canoes at the falls, went through the falls to the first island, which is, I think, 6 Mile Island in Louisville. Saturday, went up to the island above Harrods Creek. Was that 14 Mile Island? August 29th, Mr. McGowan went up and run the line between Captain Bullitt and Mr. Douglas. Philip Cooper got bit by a snake and went down to him with bear's oil and salt. I don't think that's going to help a snake bite much. But that was a common problem for surveyors. You're doing a lot of detailed work. You're trying to pay attention to your counting. We'll talk when we explain some of the equipment surveyors use, how they did that, to give you an idea. But on the expedition, help me out here, Jason, for the one we did the show on. Mason-Dixon, thank you. On the Mason-Dixon survey, when they were working through the winter into the spring, and when the spring came, they actually stopped the expedition because they said the rattlesnakes were coming out of their den. So it obviously something you'd have to watch for. Probably still a problem today for surveyors. This.
Where would that have been? You mentioned rattlesnakes. They generally don't come this far north. I'm curious where it was.
Here you would have timber rattlesnakes. They're still common in Kentucky. There's not, fortunately, we don't have a lot of poisonous snakes, but timber rattlers, water moccasins, lots of copperheads, and there's a few other species, but that's the bulk of it. So this shows you how they wrap their supplies in canvas and oilcloth to try to keep it dry, and you can see the limited capacity for cargo in a canoe. So continuing the surveying, August 30th, started to Kentucky, went 25 miles. So this is Bullitt and the few men that are left with him that are returning up to Fort Pitt, up the Ohio River. They got on the 31st of August, they got to Kentucky River at dark, went with Samuel Hinch and killed a very fat buffalo. That night there came 3 Indians to us. Captain Bullitt and his company led us and went to Kentucky and hid things that we intended to leave there, killed a deer swimming the river. That would make a deer a very easy prey for a man with a rifle and a canoe. September 6th, running survey line, found a buck, skinned him, killed a buffalo, 2 calves. So they were very indiscriminate on what they shot. Anything that was easy to get. There was so much game at the time, they would have found it everywhere. Elk, deer, buffalo. They don't make much reference to fishing. They do a little bit later here. So they apparently the red meat was so easy for them to attain, they had little interest in eating the fish out of the Ohio River or the streams. And it's interesting here, they're stashing equipment and gear, so they obviously intend to come back in the next year. Went a piece further and hit some things, talked about that. Left our kegs of meat, tallow, and flour in the canoe. Tallow is just cooked down fat, basically, which had a wide abundance of uses in the 18th century. On the 4th of September, they set out for lands. They're going to survey. Went about 6 miles, killed a buffalo. A lot of buffalo, obviously very good meat, for their suppers and breakfast, and a calf, and skinned and cooked it. And that's, again, how they spelt cooked. So on the 6th, they ran a surveying line, found a buck, and skinned and killed. They're making a lot of references about their diets. So obviously, they like to eat. Went out in the evening to fetch meat for 4 miles. So yeah, a lot of entries about that. Next picture, there's a rifleman in a canoe. So he's about probably taking a deer that's swimming across the river there. That actually, go back, that's Steve Caudle, who portrays Daniel Boone professionally. That's one of my canoes. Next, the Bullitt Party returns to the settlements September 26th, went 8 to 10 miles, again shooting more buffalo. Saw a leopard and went back to the cabin lots. So I thought it was interesting, they wrote leopard and they didn't say mountain lion or puma. Interesting, the terminology they use. So on the 27th, stayed that day, settled with Captain Bullitt, and barbecued our meat. I was fascinated to see that. I've never seen the use of the term barbecue in 18th century literature. Have you, Jason? But I don't think that means they had really good barbecue sauce. That's probably referring to how they cooked the meat. Yeah. On the 28th, started about 10 o'clock, came 18 miles and encamped. 29th, went about 20 miles, it rained all day. So just paddling 20 miles upstream the Ohio River in a day of rain is not going to be fun. October 1st, went 10 miles of Sandy Creek, which was the Big Sandy River. On the 3rd, walked a piece on shore, found a cabin where they got 2 pumpkins, which made us a fine supper with a turkey about 8 miles above the Wyandotte River. October 6th through 10th, continued travel upriver, passing several islands and sandbars, hunted, fished, catching 3 fine catfish at a sycamore. So that's the only reference in this entire of these 3 journals they made to doing any fishing. But obviously they made a lot of references to shooting and eating meat. Met 2 Indians at 2 sandbars, passed the Hawken River. About 8 o'clock, got to Robert McInnes. So they're running into frontier settlements at this point on their return trip. To pass the Messingen River, past multiple islands. October 16th, went up Fish Creek, 12 miles to Walses. There they saw Misters Clark and Higgins. That could have been George Rogers Clark. On the 19th, Jimmy Sadasky left us, and we got about 3 miles above Wheeling. On the 21st, they met Colonel Stevens, and they got to Mr. Munchmore's on the 22nd. Interesting name. Next picture. So this is one of my expeditions coming to an end as a representation of them getting back to the settlements. So what's the key impact? And after this, we'll open up for questions. What's the key impact and observations one can make from this survey expedition? It was the beginning of aggressive efforts to survey and settle Kentucky. It was a significant contributing factor to Lord Dunmore's War, which was a war between Virginia, sponsored really by the colonial governor, not by the British government. acting independently at war with the Shawnee. The physical challenges, boat and canoe travel 20 to 40 miles a day, foot travel 20 to 30 miles a day, exposure to elements, loss or exhaustion of provisions, snake bites, fear of Indian aggression, frequent presence and interaction with the Indians. No mention of dogs anywhere in these journals. So your long hunters that came through the Cumberland Gap to hunt in Kentucky always brought dogs with them. They were early warning systems, and they helped them run down game and buffalo and so forth. So I thought it's interesting. So I guess the fact that they traveled by canoe is probably why they didn't bring any dogs. And if they had brought them, I feel like they would have mentioned them somewhere. Little mention of fishing. Again, game is easily available. These men were proficient with canoe building and use. They're very frequent reference to making camp, but they don't provide any details on their shelters or their provisions much. Unless they were stolen, then they make note of it, typically. Land claims were the primary reward. Only 2 surveys were entered as a result of this expedition. So when Bullitt gets back, he takes all this work of this hard 5 months of labor and dangers and risk to Colonel Preston in what county? Fincastle County, which is what we're basing our impression off of as frontier surveyors. And Preston said these are all illegal. He said that we can't be surveying that far into Indian country. So he didn't interpret those treaties of Fort Stanwix and other treaties as a right to survey in these lands and settle there yet. Lord Dunmore obviously had different feelings because he probably financed this whole expedition, but I can't find any references to who paid for it. Bullitt could have done it on credit and gone deeply in debt with this because he protested back to the colonial governor, to Lord Dunmore, about Preston not recognizing all this surveying work. And Preston must have been on pretty strong ground or was a very powerful figure because the colonial government did not force him. He did accept only two surveys out of 5 months of work of all that thousands of acres. So basically, the expedition was a success from the standpoint of executing it, but as far as acquiring land in Kentucky, it was a complete failure. So here's a picture of Colonel Preston saying that I'm not entering these surveys. And that basically concludes the presentation. Sorry if it was a lot of journal entries, but I wanted to include as much as I could to give you a feel of how this expedition looked from the eyes of the men who were on it. Fincastle County Surveyors is a reenacting group that Jason and I started. We're currently recruiting surveyors, foremen, cooks, chainmen, hunter scouts. We have about 20 members at this time to do expeditions and do presentations. We do a lot of stuff at fort events like Fort Boonesboro, Martin Station in Virginia, where we set up a surveyor's camp and do a lot of education on the topic. Why don't we open it up to any questions at this time? Next picture, is it on there? That's my fleet of canoes. Yeah. Yes.
When they survey, did they survey like 50 acres or 100 acres, or were they surveying mines?
They would pick a starting point. So let's say at the Falls, Ohio and Louisville, downtown Louisville would have been all marsh and swampland at the time, all the way back to where the Standard Fair Airfield is, that was all swamp and wetlands. So the only good land in the Louisville area at that time, while they were there, would have been going up the creeks. I'm trying to think of the name of the one that goes through St. Matthews. It has 3 branches to it. But a lot of good land up through there and good water and so forth, and far enough away from the swamps. So they would have just picked a starting point, but they would have surveyed as much as they could. As these journals indicate, they were doing sometimes thousands of acres a day.
But when they surveyed X number of acres for a swamp, they would mark that off, right?
They would do tree blazes typically at that time to mark the lines and mark the boundaries. Yeah.
I mean, they did trees, right?
Trees? Yes, they use trees as markers or foundation boundaries. So if you're starting at a creek where it empties into the Ohio River, that gives you a easy to find starting point. There are ways to, which we can talk about a little bit here, to try to identify where you are in the wilderness, but it's not as easy to use navigational equipment on land as it is on the water, where you have the horizon as part of your base of reference. So they would just pick a starting point that they could easily find later. Then they would do tree blazes whenever they made a corner. Sometimes they would mark 3 trees to triangulate where that corner marker would be. Later years, they would use monuments and stone monuments and so forth, but generally trees were your markers, and they'd blaze them with notes and so forth in their marks.
So they were doing the full perimeter of the tract that they were surveying?
They would do, yes, they would do full perimeter, and all of Kentucky was done with meet and bound surveying, which a meet is a straight line that you shoot with the compass over here. The bound is short for boundary because that could be a rock formation, a mountaintop, it could be a stream, a river. Locust Grove, for example, is a good example. The northern boundary of Locust Grove, because they originally had about 640 acres. It's 55 acres today that the city of Louisville maintains. And the Ohio River was the northern boundary, and Muddy Run Creek that goes through the subdivision across from Locust Grove, that was the southern boundary. So I had 2 boundaries that were bounds or natural features, and the rest of it is straight lines that was cut with the surveying compass. Yes?
What were the 2 surveyed areas that were claimed?
I can find that out. I don't have that memorized. I don't recognize the names as being prominent. And like I said, I apologize, I don't have them written down here. But they were right in kind of the St. Matthews area of Louisville, yeah. Or probably a little closer to the river. And then the subsequent year in 1774, Lord Dunmore tried to do this all over again, but he shored it up a little better. He hired not Bullitt, but John Floyd to lead the surveying expedition the next year and to redo all the work that Bullitt did. And Floyd lived on the property with Glenn Preston and was almost like a son to him. The man was very fond of him. So Lord Dunmore must have thought if John Floyd does it, Preston's going to agree and not refuse to enter these surveys. That surveying expedition met in conflict with the Indians, and several men were killed, and they left Kentucky as fast as they could. And that opened up that and other events led to Lord Dunmore's war with the Shawnee. Would y'all like to learn a little bit about some of the equipment here? Okay, let's do that. Jason, why don't you explain the key tools we use and what you have there?
Now for the fun stuff. I'm kitted out this evening as normally I don't wear all this when we're doing our presentations, but I thought you'd like to see traveling in the wilderness. We would have gone armed heavily. I've got my rifle here. This is a flintlock rifle. It is a rifle, not a musket. A musket has a smooth bore. This is a rifle that has rifle on the inside. I probably should have a sling on this so I can put it on my back. With the rifle, I would have been carrying that. Dennis, as the lead surveyor, may have had a pistol with his belt. And we would have scouts on the outside of the surveying team, and they would be the hunter scouts, and they would have warned us if there was danger, and we could have huddled together. On a team, there's about 10 men, so you could get a nice little platoon formation there with your rifles. And wait a few seconds. Oh, we got to have the microphone on. Yeah, is that good? I'm assuming so. We'll say it's okay. Anyway, we'll talk about some of the equipment. The main thing and the thing that we protected the most is, of course, the surveyor's compass. At the time, they didn't call it a compass. They called it a circumferentor. That's a mouthful, isn't it? Circumferentor, but it's basically a compass. Dennis has some originals. This one is from 1750, as he said earlier. This one is a little bit later, but this particular one, of course, is wood. That one's made of brass. So it's a little different, just a little different thing. And they may have carried them in this kind of small traveling case. This is a reproduction. It's wood, but it would have enabled them to put it in a satchel or a bag to carry it. They probably we kind of go back and forth on this. They probably wouldn't have done they probably would have had the tripods, but they probably would have used the Jacobs staff. The other thing that is extremely important is the chain. Anybody know how long a surveyor's chain is? 60 some. That's closest. Anyone have any closer guesses? You're right though. 66 feet. And you're saying, well, why 66 feet? Well, it works out. It works out by the mile. Everybody know how big a mile is? Very good. If you break that down, you'll get to 66 feet or 33 feet. It was easy to do acreage with a 66-foot chain. Now, each one of these links is 7.92 inches. Why is it 7.92 inches? Because it works out to 66 feet. When you do so many of them, it works. It just works out. The math works out. They also would have carried one or two of these rods, Gunter rods, these are called. If you're some familiar surveyor, you may have seen guys holding this, right? But this is 10 of those chain links. So it's 79.20 inches.
So we'd have him with the Gunter's rod, surveyor would be on the compass, and then you have two chain men. And sometimes you had an axeman which cleared branches and stuff out of the way as well. And then he would go out there a distance. The chainman would stretch the chain out, and then I'd direct them left or right to keep them on line if I'm trying to shoot a straight line. And then they would drop a pin in. You'd have one here underneath the plumb bob. And then each time the chain was extended, pulled tight and positioned, they'd drop a pin in, and then everybody would pick everything up and walk forward.
These came in sets of 11, not a dozen, 11. One under the compass, and then we do 10 sets, and then we pick it up, and we always leave the last one in, which is the 11th one, where the compass goes again. So that's why they come in sets of 11. This ring would have been probably on a leather belt by the lead chain man or myself as the assistant. Carrying this and pinning every time. And then Dennis would pick them up on the way in, and we would exchange, and off we went. It was fairly quick. They also carried leather-bound journals like this to make their notes in. They did have pencils, a crude form of pencil that they used. It's hard to. I've tried it to carry ink and quill. It's nigh impossible. But those crude pencils you could carry. They're basically just a big thick piece of lead in a brass little tube. They were real thick, real hard to write with. I just have my tomahawk here just for giggles. But they also carried these small drafting sets. This one is not as old as it should be, but it is fairly old. A lot of these instruments did not change over the years. This is a nice brass set from the middle of the 19th century, but they carried these little boxes so they could sit around the campfire and draft notes or draft maps or make all kind of observations. They might carry a small pocket compass like this one. Just something simple they could put in their pocket. Also the ones like we see the Boy Scouts carry, little brass ones. They carried those too. Let's see, we did that. Oh, and also they carried this wonderful instrument. Does anybody know what this is? Say it loud. No. Thank you for playing. This is actually Mr. Hadley's octant. William Hadley invented this. An octant is what of a circle? How much of a circle? An eighth. Yeah, an octant. How many degrees in a circle? Do you see the problem? So the Navy changed it to a
sextant, which is 1/6 of a circle, and that's easy to go into 360. So a modern sextant, still used today, is and used probably about 1785 or so. They started using sextants in the Navy. Why would we carry this? This measures angles of the sun at sea. Mason and Dixon, as we mentioned before, they had to find new ways to do things like cross these giant rivers in Pennsylvania and Maryland. And so they were both mathematicians. They weren't surveyors, they were mathematicians. And they brought these kind of instruments with them. And one day they were crossing a river, and how are we going to cross the river? We don't know how far it is. We can't take a 66-foot chain across it. So they said, wait a minute, we've got one of these. It measures angles. Let's do math. And being mathematicians, they would enjoy that. Not me, but they would. And so they found out that if you turn it sideways, you can make it work. So they sent some men across the river each with a pole and a chain, and they measured the length of the chain. They did 132 feet. One guy stood at the end of that chain length, one guy stood at the other end, and they put their eye to the thing, and they matched the poles up. They came up with an angle, and of course that's a 90-degree angle. They knew this angle. Those of you who did that kind of math in school or remembered doing that kind of math in school, and they could figure out, oh, that river's 463 feet. But they also could use that for deep ravines. They could use it. Mountains are a different story, but so they carried. Not everybody carried an octant, but it was useful if you knew you were going to be surveying across rivers. Sometimes the guys carried notes and maps in their map cases. These were made of leather, oiled leather, and these would have a strap around as well. And you may be saying, well, I need some land surveyed. How much is that going to be? Well, the Fincastle County surveyors will do your 1,000 acres for £2. That's right. If you have 1,000 acres, we will charge you £2 to do that. It's a lucrative thing. We're doing for Colonel Preston, I think he had 20,000 acres?
Yeah.
Something like that. So we'd get a pretty good chunk of change out of that, right?
You still have Preston Highway in Louisville, and he never came to Kentucky. So land was surveyed, entered for him, streets named after him, but he never saw it. So he probably just sold it.
Yep. And that's about all the equipment. I think I covered everything. Yeah. Questions, comments, snide remarks? And feel free afterwards to come up and, show and tell. Come and see.
I'm showing my ignorance of Kentucky history, but is Fincastle County what they used to refer to all of Kentucky?
Yes. All of what would be the little point of Virginia, most of West Virginia, Western Virginia, West Virginia, and all of Kentucky, and then that starts getting split up about the same time that Bullitt's doing his thing. You start getting into the Lexington County, and West Virginia becomes its own thing, and Western Virginia.
They referred to it as Transylvania at one time as well. Yeah. And that was, well, it became Fincastle County because Colonel, who did Sycamore shows, Henderson. Colonel Henderson created Transylvania Land Company, which was officed out of a cabin in Boonesboro. And he did massive amounts of surveying in the Lexington area. And they basically told him that was all illegal. You don't have rights, and he was surveying land that had already been surveyed. So they did settle with him, and he got quite a bit of acreage out of the deal personally, so he did okay. But most of his surveys were invalidated, and his whole land company was as well.
And there is no Fincastle County anymore. It got split up, and if you can look at the history of it, it's split up into various counties in Western Virginia, along like where Roanoke and all that is. That's where it used to be.
There's still a town in Virginia, Fincastle, and Colonel Preston's home is available for tour. It's preserved and open to the public.
Right outside of that community.
What part was longitude and latitude thrown into the mix?
Well, latitude was known because of this. They could do latitude. Longitude didn't really come into a thing to the 1780s. guy by the name of Harrison, he invented the Harrison chronometer, which is a clock. And that's why on shipboard they do noon sights, because they have to find out where you are. So you do noon sights, and you have your latitude, and then because you've done a noon, then your chronometer tells you it's noon back in London or wherever. And so you count how many degrees you've gone since then, and that's how they've discovered latitude. There's a great movie about it called Longitude, not Longitude, Latitude's this way. It talks about Harrison's, how he came up with this idea. He was a clockmaker, and so naturally he would go that way. They were doing there was a prize. Queen Anne actually did a prize for longitude. He won it eventually, and George III was really interested in it because he was a science. He liked science. Yeah, it wasn't until they surveyed Indiana they started using longitude. Was it
Yeah,
Indiana?
in Kentucky was all meet and bound surveying.
Yeah.
Indiana, other than right across the river, was
Is
all
all
done
straight.
off the prime meridian.
Yeah.
So that's all.
Yeah, so Indiana's the first
longitude
state.
survey.
So the farther west you go, the more square the states become, and that's why, one of the reasons why. Yeah, we didn't use it. We would have known it was, daytime. We may have had a watch, but of course there was no such thing as time zones either. So, yet. We would have probably, I would say, we would have gotten up with the sun, except for those rainy days, and decided what we were going to do that day. You read some of these, like Dennis, if you were reading through those, a lot of days they didn't really do surveying. They were doing other things to survive. If it rained, they didn't do anything. And we've been on some encampments where it's rained, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to do anything but sit here. Watch the fire go out, kind of thing. But you're also very, it's not like today. We kind of play at it a little bit, but they were always conscious of the natives were watching them. They kind of thought they were. They usually were. Right. And they were very conscious of the thing. But you also got to remember where they are. They're not a mile and a half from Walmart. They're months. Months to get back to, when they were, that last couple of slides, when they were coming back, I know most of those areas they were at. Like they were talking about, getting at the big Sandy River. That's where it comes out. That's the border of Kentucky and West Virginia. That's where I live, in Ashland. So I knew exactly where they are, and I know how far they've got to go up the river to get to. You talk about going to Wheeling, West Virginia. That's, today you can get there in about 4 hours by car. Back then it was a month and a half to get to that point. And that's Wheeling, and that's not yet the Fort Pitt. That's not yet back to quote-unquote civilization back east.
How many were typically in a survey party?
40 to 60.
So that's why they needed all the buffalo.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of mouths to feed. And in some of those entries shared, they mentioned having flour, 4 months into the expedition. I'm surprised they had any flour left, very surprised, due to spoilage, theft, loss. I wonder if they weren't resupplied by the Indians, because they were encountering Delaware Indians a lot, and they were probably purchasing supplies off of them, because I just can't imagine. I'm sorry?
40 to 80 people?
40 to 60.
40 to 60.
Yeah, but you're right, that's a big demand on supplies.
Yeah, a typical...
So they relied on the meat because it was one very available source of food for them year-round.
A survey team, not a company. A company's 46. Team is about 10 men.
But in addition to the actual surveyors and the chain men and the surveyors and so forth, you've got hunters and scouts that know their way around. So they did have some guiding, or sometimes Indian guides when there was cooperation.
Yeah.
Didn't they have flour in barrels to keep it dry?
Yes, everything that you had to keep dry would have had to been in barrels.
So,
No plastic wrap.
that tells me that the flour was stay dry for indefinitely.
If the barrels
Yeah,
maintain
and the
their
bugs
integrity.
didn't get to it.
Yeah.
And the bugs didn't get to it.
How they get in if the barrel
They could have.
water type?
Yeah. Stuff like water, like water in barrels, like things grow in it. It's amazing. You think nothing would grow in a sealed container, but it does.
Now, they wouldn't have carried water much. They would have just
Yeah.
drank it out of the streams and so forth. We don't feel safe doing that when we do our expeditions, so we actually use wooden kegs to carry our water.
We're talking about the swamps along the Louisville banks or whatever. How did those get drained?
There's a creek called Pond Creek that goes through Okolona in south part of the city of Louisville, and that's the drainage to drain all that Sanford Field area and all the downtown area. So those were done in the early 1800s. Yeah, they just. I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah, just basically canals.
Yeah, they would have dug
it.
drainage canals down to a creek, and then eventually put in pipes. Eventually, yeah.
What body of water would carry that away?
Probably
Yeah.
one of the creeks going through downtown. Probably it's all underground now. It goes out to the Ohio.
Well, it's the St. Matthews area drains through Beargrass Creek through three
Yeah.
branches to downtown. Not far from right at the heart of downtown is where Beargrass Creek dumps. A little further up is Harrods Creek. And then Pond Creek, which is man-made, goes to Salt River, which then dumps into the Ohio.